So, chapter 3, but to make procurement thrive requires the correct support. I guess the number one thing I would say to you as somebody who considers myself a procurement person to y'all who consider yourselves finance people is procurement is not linear. Now, purchasing may be pretty linear, right? Purchasing may go from A to B. Procurement, which to me is the surrounding circle around the purchasing activity, is very holistic. And so, for example, we have to create all kinds of ways to nudge people in directions based on guidance that has come from our leadership through their directing legislation. Do this for Israel, don't do this for green, do this for ammunition, don't do this for the rest. So we have to create a whole process around how we elegantly execute work within the confines of what's been given to us by our leadership. A very important activity of procurement is to create choice customers, customers that don't have to do business with you. If all we do is a linear transaction and we just push it to the market and go, then we miss an opportunity to create new vendors, people who haven't done business with us before. If you look at the way some of the ERP systems are set up, they make you have logins to the system in order to see bids. Well, that's very challenging for choice customers. And ironically, we did an assessment for a state where if you wanted to be an MBE vendor, you had to fill out 8 more things in order to prove that you were an MBE vendor. So it was chasing away the very customer that we most wanted to come and join us because we had this execution mentality, this linear mentality about, well, of course they're going to do that. Of course they're going to work through that. Planning category strategies through new contract approaches. We were dealing with a different state where the way they had bought roofing, who knew there were different ways to buy roofing, was not meeting their MBE strategy. So we helped them flip the contracting method. We wanted to contract with the people who do roofing directly and then allow them to choose the roofing systems. So that takes a thought, right? That takes a full understanding of what are the goals and how will we execute procurement to drive the goals. Analysis and context is the impact procurement. So in the interest of time, I'll come to the next slide, which is probably overall my most important slide as it relates to this conversation, which is I would ask that if you have procurement underneath you, to please support them as not simply a means of encumbrance, but as a strategic function. Probably the number one reason that procurement people would have worry about being under the CFO is that the CFO is going to look at procurement the same way that ERP systems often look at procurement, which is a means to an end to encumber money. And so it's very transactional and very linear. And so if you're over procurement, understand there's a lot of things that we want procurement to do that is not simply driving 15 transactions every 2 weeks. So fund training and growth as procurement professionals. Encourage the development of skills for procurement that is more than simply executing the purchasing event. If all you've ever done is purchasing and you were put into a leadership role, how will you suddenly magically know how to drive spend analysis and DEI programs and the rest? It's a pathway. And so building leaders that way will help you to be able to get people to join an ARC. Speaking of ARC, another major concern that procurement people would have about being under finance is, do they have a maximum glass ceiling on how high they can grow in your organization? Because if the perception is that procurement comes up through finance, and my only pathway once I get to a certain level in finance is to become the financial officer, but then I'm not a CPA or I'm not a financial person. So then people may feel like they've hit their ceiling because there's nowhere else to go. So attack that directly. Speak to cross-training opportunities. Find ways to make it so that somebody has a continued path that they can see in your organization. The last important thing I would say is encourage them to take calculated risks, calculated risk-taking to advance the mission and support them when the phone calls come. So what do I mean by when the phone calls come? We were in a different state. There was analysis done on the way that furniture was purchased. It was clear that the contract methodology there was not very thought out. It had grown organically over time. It was not supporting the e-procurement strategy. It was not strategic sourcing. It just created a lot of contract administration risk. The analysis was clear. Then you take the analysis to the leadership and you say, this should happen, and when this happened, the phone will ring. So tell me whether you want me to do this or not. If we rebid furniture and we change the way that this purchasing is done, it's going to cause several people to get upset. And yet it's the right thing to do. So if I go forward and do it, then don't fold on me when the calls come, and it's your decision. That's a conversation that should happen inside of your organization, because if you're truly driving change inside of the procurement shop, you're going to find some of those opportunities. Okay, so that citizens are served by the strongest characteristics of both. Finance and procurement together are stewards of the taxpayer. These dollars need to be accounted for. We need to ensure they're for their purpose. We need to proactively eliminate fraud and abuse, employ the money that it was intended for, share information transparently, and being a modern business partner to the vendor community. All of these things are very important characteristics of a well-run organization, and finance and procurement are arm in arm linked on the delivery of that. Finance and procurement ensure vital missions. The actions of finance and procurement together results in the supply and support in direct service to citizens. Direct expertise in these areas allows service agencies to focus on their expertise. The question about how much procurement is in departments. Enough to be a good liaison and partner with the center, but not so much that we spread procurement into 8 directions in a way that really wastes that resource. Resiliency is established through a long-term approach to the contractor relationships and make sure that maximum use of available funds is ensured by making sure that we don't waste or lose money. And in case you didn't know, it's 405 days until you're supposed to have contractually obligated all of your ARPA funds. That is an actual true number that I actually truly calculated myself. So contractually obligated does not mean spent. It means that you have made an encumbrance. You have made an agreement in a form that encumbers and commits the expenditure of money, and you are supposed to have done that by December 31st, 2024. As an example of somewhere where finance and procurement should work together to make sure money isn't left on the table. And lastly, you directly affect confidence of the people around you in these points of light about that government can work, that government can deliver value to people and to individuals. And we need to dedicate ourselves to reinforce this citizen belief in the services provided by government. And how do they most see and touch the services of government? It is through the expenditure of money. It is through the provision of vendors as service partners along with our individuals. And through procurement and finance flows the lifeblood of the way that government works. So I said, what if you're small? And we had several small and mighty hands, and Mike asked me specifically to pick this up. So some of this sounds big, and some people may have very few procurement people. I have other things on this. I'm just going to do a couple since our session ends at 5:05, and yet the general reception starts at 5. Mike, did you set that up? Should I throw level up again on the phone? So if you're small and mighty, let's talk about that for a second. So at ICMA, which is your city managers last year, I did a speech on the 4 profiles of people who consider getting outside help. And so I did 4 profiles of the one-man band, the invisible man, the vase curator, and the surge protector. If you're interested in any of those, I will reveal the rest later, but I won't waste your time on it now. But I was going to pick from this the one slide that I did on the one-man band. So if you're a one-man band, the CFO or administrative officer or mayor or judge likely wears multiple hats, and there may not be a designated procurement function. Let's ask that question. Who doesn't have a designated procurement function? More people than I thought. Purchasing needs are probably met with P cards or through submission of payment requests post facto. And there's probably little to no automation, 3-color requisition requests, Excel sheets to vendors. I have some laughter in the front row. Okay, so if I was in a small but mighty, what would I do? I think that running a procurement function with no procurement professionals should still be designed by procurement professionals. Even if that was my answer to that question at GFOA last year when they said, what if I have no procurement people? I said, I would still go get a procurement person to help me build a system that I could run without procurement people. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Or you're going to have everybody do things well, and then one person's going to do things badly and get 2-ply tires instead of 4-ply tires, and it'll be in the newspaper. Or sell to their brother-in-law, and it'll be in the newspaper. Or let somebody run amok, and it'll go to the newspaper. So I really think even if you don't have the budget to have a procurement professional full-time, I would still tap into knowledge from people who know how to help design that in order to help you get set up. So if I was small but mighty, I would definitely have a P card for sure. I would have a strategy around who's allowed to hold that P card, what they do with that P card, and how they justify the P card. And then you establish that P cards, procurement cards, are a method of payment, not a method of purchase, which means I'm going to set up contracts, or I'm going to say where you can use this card and you can pay there. If you go start buying things that are not associated with our strategy, then we need to have a conversation. I would really research cooperative contracts. The market is awash with cooperative contracts. Sourcewell, Omnia, Texas DIR, E&I, NASPO. I could go for the rest of the time that we have. So there's somewhere out there, there's cooperative contracts for your categories. Every government spends in about 30, 40 major spend categories. And of those, there are many things that are highly commoditized, where you can get an outcome by using someone else's contract. You can still assess, but one of the cliches I use is don't step over a dime to get to a penny. So you perceive you can save a lot of money on the admin fee by going and doing it yourself. But what would you have used as an alternative to your time rather than going and saving a very small amount of money against a contract someone else has negotiated, whereas you could have used that time for custom things in your organization that no one else will have done a co-op contract for. So I would definitely have a strong co-op contract strategy. Get some help with baseline template design. Don't have people making up RFPs individually and tossing them out to the street because you don't know what's in them. Your lawyers aren't going to trust them. So once one RFP messes up once, then your lawyer's going to want to see every RFP for the rest of time, which means everything's going to add 2 weeks. And then somebody's going to mess up with the financial encumbrance. Now the CFO is going to want to see everything every time. Now that adds 3 weeks to every RFP. So if you wonder why our procurement goes slow, it's because people end up not trusting it. But in the same way that if we burned our hand on a stove, we don't cover the stove in caution tape. We teach people that the stove is a tool that is dangerous, but it is for purpose. It does things. So don't use the stove to burn your hand. Use stove to cook. And so, the ability to explain to people like how to use tools so that it is not terrifying and that we don't have 3 people that have to agree before you can approach the stove in the future, you will accelerate the ability to drive procurement. Baseline training and best value solicitations. So hopefully if you have a good P-card strategy and a good co-op strategy, then the main things you're left with are complex things that have to be judged in the market. Not everybody has to be a procurement professional, but teaching the basics of how to build scope, how to understand your project from the perspective of the outcomes, outputs, and methods of measure that you will use to judge whether there was success in the project, and then how you judge a vendor response against those measures. And then how can you break up the projects in ways that allows you to maintain some control of the projects over time? And then finally, baseline contract management policies. What does it mean to manage a contract? What does it mean to manage a vendor? If you find yourself outside of the 4 corners of the contract, your first action is to stop. Your second action is to figure out why you're outside of the 4 corners of the contract. And if you can't get back within it, then figure out how you escalate. You can do a lot of things to save projects that are failing as long as they still have some money left and time left on the budget. There is very little you can do to save a contract relationship that has spent all the money and has run out of time. So teaching people what is the basic minimum expectation that you have if you are responsible for a relationship with a vendor, those are things that I would do. So even if you have a shop that has you and that you're running the finance office and procurement, this is like the core that you have to have, in my opinion. And that's all for me.
2 quick questions, and then we'll get everybody out to the welcome reception this evening. So Dustin, you mentioned kind of contract administration or contract management not being a legal function, but being more of a business function. So how do you balance responsibility between the procurement office and the operating department? So who leads contract negotiations, and how do you work together as a business?
In terms of by and large, where would I expect to see contract management as a concept exist in an organization? If I'm walking in, I expect to see it in the procurement department, myself personally. And if you have a purchasing shop that has not had that responsibility, that may be new to them. They may think my responsibility ends at the point that it goes off into agencies. But then who's setting the policy for managing vendors, and when do you escalate to say that there is a problem that needs to be managed and that the force of our organization needs to be placed to drive contract adherence? To me, that is procurement sets the training on here's how you stay inside of the contract, here's how your actions to stay inside of the contract protect our ability to enforce that contract at a later date. And if you start to see problems escalating coming up, here's how you escalate. Is general counsel part of the escalation path? Absolutely. Is it the first step? It is not. The first step is teaching the project manager to stay in the confines of the contract. A lot of times, so we do a lot of procurement manuals. We also write contract management guides. Why do we write contract management guides? Because people who manage contracts don't think they're procurement people. So you have to write a document for them to tell them what their actions are. And so to me, the end user is absolutely the one who is directing the activities of the vendor, but they need to do it in a way that is consistent with the standards of the organization. And I feel the standards come out of procurement. Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent.